Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by Justin Jackson. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I know you from Mega Maker first, but you're also my very favorite podcast host. You're the co-founder of Transistor FM.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks. And we appreciate having you on the platform.
So can you tell folks, I feel like you're an all-around internet guy. Probably everyone has heard of you before, but could you give folks a little bit of a background just for context for the conversation we're going to have today?
Sure. Yeah, I co-founded Transistor.fm in 2018 with my friend John Buda. We do podcast hosting and analytics. Before that, I mostly worked for SaaS companies doing product management and product marketing. But I've also been a freelancer and done consulting. So I think I left full-time work in 2014 and then did that is that right? 2016, sorry. And then did it for 2 years before founding Transistor.
Cool. And I think the focus for today's call kind of starts from a tweet that you shared about motivating unmotivated users to use the platform or the SaaS or the app or whatever it is. And I felt like the question, I looked for it before, I couldn't find it, but in my mind, to paraphrase it, it was kind of like, you correct me if I'm wrong, it was something like, there's nothing you can do to the product to make unmotivated users motivated to use it. And my reaction to it, and the reason I remember it like that is because I was like, well, why does it have to be in the product that you motivate the user? It felt like a false premise to me. So
Yeah.
can you actually correct me and tell me if you remember what you did tweet and what you meant?
Sure. Yeah. So, and it was based on, I think I was listening to a podcast and they were talking specifically about onboarding and how it's possible to make changes in the onboarding that will in turn increase usage or, fundamentally affect the activation and retention of customers. And I think the larger point I'm making is that better onboarding, user experience, activation is not going to solve anything if there's an underlying motivation problem. And even more broadly, I have a working thesis that could be wrong, but the working thesis is that largely individual entrepreneurs can't do much to motivate customers. They have to already be in motion. And I think we can influence it, but our influence, I think, is we have less influence than we think. But there are multiple variables in a person's life that influence desire for a product or service. And the idea that especially independents would have any sort of significant influence over what is the underlying motivation for a particular customer, what's pushing them or pulling them towards a product or towards a solution. I don't think we have as much influence there as we think. And so that's kind of the broad, I think those are the broad strokes.
Okay. So I think we agree that, well, I guess my angle on it is that better onboarding isn't going to hurt anything. It's a question of is it worth the time investment or the money investment, right?
Yeah. And also, I'm also not saying that you shouldn't try to onboard folks better, but a lot of this is based on my experience with different SaaS companies. So I'm podcast hosting right now. Before that, project management with Sprintly. Before that, email newsletters with Mailout Interactive. And you can certainly affect short-term results by doing all sorts of things, right? You can convince people to sign up for something using all sorts of tricks, onboarding tricks, UX tricks, whatever. But in terms of like long-term retention, in terms of somebody using a product and getting enjoyment out of it or getting utility out of it, and then sticking around for a long time, there has to be motivation that's coming from within the person themselves. In the same way that if I was a marriage counselor and, people came to me and wanted to fix their marriage, but one person didn't want to fix the marriage, I can't do a lot I can give them all the tricks and the techniques and everything, but ultimately the motivation for fixing something or using a product consistently has to come from the customer. And there are just so many variables that affect customer motivation that I think it's really difficult for us to, I think people imagine that they are Steve Jobs and that they can magically influence people and entice people to use things. And again, certainly at a certain scale, you could probably have more influence than not. But for most independents, I think we have very little influence, and it's better for us to focus on people who are already in motion, where there is already demonstrated demand, than trying to fabricate that demand ourselves.
That's hard to argue, and I'm not interested in arguing, honestly. It's because you've got a lot of practical experience with SaaS. I have very little, but I do have a lot of practical experience with info products and training and coaching and other sort of indie online bootstrap stuff, and including subscription memberships that do have churn. It's just there's just no software behind it. It's a membership community. And I'll also pile on and agree that the things that someone who has $1 billion marketing budget can get away with are not on the table. I mean, it's like copying Apple or Samsung or Volkswagen would be a giant waste of time and money. It wouldn't do anything, probably.
Yes. And I also think it ignores the cumulative nature of markets. So the reason we have a smartphone category is based on a bunch of other layers that came before that. And so it wasn't like when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, it was like this magical new category that no one had ever heard of before. We had existing categories of pocket MP3 players and existing smartphones, and then before that, cell phones, and before cell phones, landlines, and it goes down the line. There's always a cumulative nature to these things.
He literally did that in the announcement where he said, it's an MP3 player, it's a phone,
yes,
it's a web browser, and he said it over and over and over.
Yes, and I think this people miss this. There's a lot of independents, both service providers and product providers, I think, who feel like they can invent or innovate brand new categories, and they often invoke Steve Jobs as the example of somebody who invents categories. But if you watch what he does in those presentations, he is deliberately linking this new thing to something that's come before to create space in the customer's mind for it, because they already know what it's like to be motivated to have all their music in their pocket. They know that. They already know what it's like to forget their camera when they go on a trip and wish they had it with them. They already know that desire to check their email when they're, away from their computer. So these were all existing demonstrated demands that he taps into with the new product, and I guess the new category, which is touchscreen smartphones.
Yeah, and just to pile on there, I think it was in the Isaacson biography. I don't remember which success it was after, but it might have been after he brought Apple back from the brink, which I think was the iPod phase. And someone asked him, "What are you going to do next?" And he said, "Wait for the next big thing."
I didn't know about that anecdote, but that to me is like, that's kind of really it. Especially, this is kind of the advantage of being a small player, is that we can jump on the coattails of something bigger that's happening in the world. And whether that bigger thing was caused by a combination of geopolitical events, other kind of zeitgeist pop culture events, it doesn't really matter.
Well, like COVID for Zoom.
Yeah, like the pandemic was good for podcasting, at least initially. April and May of the initial lockdown were two of our highest months at Transistor. We couldn't, we had nothing to do with that. And if I was being judged, by my KPIs, and the board was looking at me going, well, look at your April, May, we should reward you for this. You're brilliant, Justin. It actually had nothing to do with me. It's just outside events.
Yeah. So let's bring it a little bit into specifics. So, and back to when you were talking about what independent operators or sort of bootstrappers or solo operators can do, that other than be in the right place at the right time. I mean, that just seems like a lot of false starts and opportunism. And it's like, well, wait a second. What if I actually care about something and want to make a difference with that thing? And maybe it's a question of, I talk about it on the Business of Authority all the time. It's not about building a business that I'm then going to sell in 3 years, to Google or somebody. It's about being on a mission and making enough money to be able to come back and do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's fine, and
Yeah.
in a situation like that, if you're playing a real long game and you've got your 10, 20 years and you're not worried about, I don't think you're as worried about competition, because there's no such thing. If you're on a mission and someone else wants to do it too, then that's good. That's what you want. The more competition, the better, if you're truly on a mission.
Yeah.
But the thing that you're getting at, you didn't actually say it, but like the classic, oh, I'm going to scratch my own itch and assume that everybody else has the same one. That to me is a recipe for disaster. But they're not the same thing.
Yeah, and I'm also on record. I have a skepticism about a lot of cliches, and the riches are in the niches is one of them. Partly because I'm Canadian, and it's spelled niches, or it's pronounced niches. Right. But the idea that the world is so big and that the internet is so big, and therefore anything you can imagine automatically has a market, to me is ridiculous, and has been proven time and time again by thousands, if not millions, of product launches where somebody released something that certainly should have a niche. With, the internet's huge and the world population is huge. How come there can't be enough customers to financially support this? And it's because most products and services out there just kind of fall in line with existing waves and waves of demand. So, or existing categories might be a better way to put it.
Like, what's an example, just to make it make sense?
Sure. So I have to think of something that didn't work. That's
that's hard, because you don't know. Well, did you ever launch something that failed?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so the deconstructing a failed launch is interesting, because it reveals like all the things that have to be in place. So I tried to launch basically what amounted to a paid newsletter before paid newsletters were really a thing, and had an initial good launch because of I had fans that would just buy almost anything I put out, but that turned out to be a false positive. Once I dug into it, there was no like underlying current of demand, and I was trying to create something that was too outside of the main current. So I guess the metaphor I'm using now is a river, right? So you got a rushing river, and sometimes there's this idea of like, well, maybe I can like just go off here on this little stream and maybe something will develop. But really, most things just kind of fall in line with what's already happening in the river. Now, if I launched it today, maybe it would have been better, because there's just been a zeitgeist that I couldn't have accounted for that's carved out a category called paid newsletters that is now kind of a thing. And it might work now.
So so you could say that you're ahead of your time, and there are tons of examples of technology that is like this. I mean, like,
yes,
AI was ahead of its time, like in the 60s, if you want to call it AI, right? It's like, what was even the application? How would you even use it? But I do want to, we have a semantic difference on the word niche, which I also pronounce that way.
Yeah.
To me, I use it, I use it very, very specifically on the show and in my writing to mean the people I serve, the market that I serve. And specialization would be more like a product or an internal thing. So like I could specialize in Romulan calligraphy.
Yeah.
But who is it for? That's not a niche. In my lexicon, a niche, Romulan calligraphy is not a niche. Mm-hmm. It's a specialization. It's something about me. It's something that I could put on a resume. A niche is like some segment of, some subsegment of the human population defined by demographics like CEOs of Fortune 500s, or psychographics like cynics, or vertical market like dentists. So it could be, it could be any one of these things. And for someone who's starting out and doesn't have a lot of time or money to do marketing, then I strongly advocate going after what I'm defining as a niche, which is this, Seth Godin would call the minimum viable audience, like the smallest possible group of people who you could connect with and help. And if you can figure that out, if you can figure out how to help 10 strangers, not fans, 10 strangers who want to hear more about your Romulan calligraphy, and they're willing to spend $1,000 per print or something, then maybe you can fund that mission. But just going to the whole wide world in a little, essentially, if we use a fishing metaphor, you're just in this little dinghy with one fishing pole and one hook, and you're going to go out into the ocean. No, go to a barrel.
Yeah, except with the barrel is already fundamentally limited in terms of upside. And so I think part of my challenge with, meaning like, are you talking about fishing in a barrel?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that there's only so many fish in a barrel.
Well, as a starting point, I mean.
Yeah. But the metaphor actually fits in my mind, because what worries me about niches is I keep seeing people defining them before they've felt the pull of the market. And so maybe later we can get back to how you recognize the pull of a market. But
that's really interesting. Yeah.
And an example of this would be, there's a British fellow that moves into my town here. We've got maybe 60,000, 70,000 people here. And he starts a baked potato takeout place.
For who?
For people who like baked potatoes, I guess.
Yeah. See, that's okay. Go ahead.
And so this is what I'm, and you can do this lots of ways. You can say, well, I'm going to provide, you can arrive in a town and say, I'm going to provide SEO services for restaurant owners. Mm-hmm. The challenge with defining that up front is you actually don't know if there's demonstrated demand for that thing. All you've done is you've invented what you think might be a need. You're guessing.
Yeah. I total agreement there. I'm not saying throw a dart. I'm saying investigate. I would say investigate the restaurant owners and see what they want. And it's probably not going to be SEO.
Yes. And then the flip side is iteratively finding 10 people who want your thing is probably a good starting point. It's one good iteration. My concern is that I've also seen a lot of people find something where they did find those 10 customers, but there was no demand beyond that. And then they commit themselves to this niche where there's only 10 customers and they really struggle. And in some ways, the 10 customers was a false positive and a bad one at that, because they're never going to have the life they truly want, because they succeeded. They were like, oh, well, if I just find 10 customers that want this, then I'll be home free. But there has to be upside beyond that. There has to be enough upside that you can get to a reasonable point in the business. And if you lose one of those 10 customers, or two of them, or three of them, which actually for some reason happens, like I don't know if there's a statistical or mathematical law that, like, losing 3 people out of 10 really hurts. And as you go up the chain, Transistor has thousands of customers. If we lose a handful of customers, it actually doesn't hurt that much. But it definitely hurts when you've only got 10. And if you don't have the benefit Transistor has, is that there's enough momentum there and enough volume that losing customers, it's actually easier for us to replace those customers. But if your
Right, 'cause you have an
total
engine
base, yeah, if your base number is lower, I'm not a mathematician, so I don't know, but if your base number is lower, it just becomes increasingly hard to
Sure.
replace those folks.
Well, because I mean, if you take it to the logical conclusion, it's one whale client. So if you're a
Yes.
freelancer with one whale client, that is an incredibly risky situation for you to be in. You'd want to have,
Yeah.
yeah, I think Blair N says you don't want to have any one client that's responsible for more than 20% of your revenue in
Yeah.
an agency type of business.
And what's odd to me also is that it's odd to me, like Seth's like minimum viable audience is an odd rubric for me. Because if you go for minimum viable audience, you might find an audience that is 10 people and that kind of maxes out at 15. And
yeah, and he would say that's not good. If it's starting to spread to other people and it's growing and you're not having to push the rope up the hill, or
Yes.
that's two different metaphors. Yes.
Yeah, push the rope.
No, and I agree with what he's saying. So I'll just kind of parrot it here. If you make a PDF and you about how to find the best, I don't know, falafel in Paris, right? And you give it to 10 people and nobody shares it, make a better PDF. If
Yes.
everybody shares it and then they share it and then they share it, then you're onto something. But if you don't find, because I think his experience, and this has been mine, is that people don't even start with one, never mind 10. They just say, I opened up a potato restaurant in Toronto, want to come?
Yes.
And everyone's like, no.
Yes. But just to pause there, what do you think he means by make a better PDF?
That no one cares. Like it was a dud. You launched to crickets.
Yeah. But when I hear make a better, I get stuck on that too, because it's like, you might have made something that's quite good. By what qualities does better have in this case?
Well, everybody's got to define their own better. But in this case, for me, it would be that it's spreading. So if it's not good enough to share with anyone, then it's not good enough. So you've either you've put it in front of the wrong people, or you need to keep working on it or something. But by not spending 6 months of your life and $10,000 or $100,000 to find out that no one actually cares about Romulan calligraphy, or that even if maybe there are people out there, but I can't find them, then it's the same thing. If I can't find them and they are out there or they don't exist, it's the same thing. And if it doesn't get shared to if there's no, my usually the way I find a barrel is look for if these people, whatever they are, has a conference that's been around for a number of years, then the barrel's big enough for you to make a living.
Yes. Yeah. So this gets back to something we alluded to before, which is how do you know that there's underlying demand?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
And I think the example you just gave is a great one. If there's a conference out there that's attracting hundreds or thousands of people, and they've been going for a long time, and people are shelling out thousands of dollars and lots of their time to go to this thing, that there's a big pool of people interested in that thing. One, because the total market there is not just the hundreds of people who attended that year,
exactly,
but it's a much bigger audience that's interested in that, and their conversion rate on those folks is lower. That's a great rubric for seeing underlying demand. And we go back to the Steve Jobs example. Steve was like, man, we're selling a lot of MP3 players, and everybody now seems to have one of these Nokia smartphones or Blackberries, and they all hate it, but they like it because they can answer their email. And he can work backwards and go, there's like, by the time the iPhone comes around, millions of smartphones had already been sold in the world. It was like there was demand there. And a product person like him goes, I can see we put a bunch of things together. What's the world demand for digital cameras at the time?
Yeah.
Like digital cameras were insane. Everybody wanted one. So there's lots of examples of momentum in those categories. And the other thing about the iPhone is that it combines a bunch of categories, even down to flashlights. I'm sure flashlight sales are down as well after the iPhone got released, right?
Yes.
So one thing I see is that Seth Godin advice of minimum viable audience is misinterpreted, where people are looking around themselves going, okay, what's the smallest thing I could find to build something on? And this can lead you to a lot of dead ends, because there's just a lot of businesses where it is actually possible to find 10 people that will pay, but you can't find people beyond that will pay, which was the problem I had with the paid newsletter. I got a big surge of folks initially who would pay this annual fee to get this newsletter. And when I questioned them about why they were joining, because I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I get more folks like this? How do I find more people like this? So, what brought you here today? And they say, oh, well, I'm just like a fan. I just wanted to see what you're doing.
Right.
Or, oh, I'm thinking about starting something similar and I want to see what you're doing. Yeah. I was like, okay, well, I can't build a business on this. I need to find people who are actively looking for this solution.
Yeah. And you didn't pick a niche though. You just launched to your audience, right? It wasn't like, you didn't say, yes, oh, you know what? Butchers really need a paid newsletter about how to be kosher. Like you didn't do that. You just like, oh, I'm Justin Jackson. I make things. I made this. Do you want it? You didn't make it for them. You didn't really know who you were making it for. Yeah.
Well, the other scenario is still possible, which is, and I'm going to say something that is, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit, but with nuance, it makes sense. Mm-hmm. You look around your town and you go, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? Oh, I know some realtors, because everybody knows some realtors. Mm-hmm. Why don't I build something for realtors? Yep. And so you call up a realtor and maybe you even do the right thing. You do an interview. Mm-hmm. Hey, can you tell me some problems in your life? And they go, oh, well, I just need like more leads, more exposure. Right. Oh, what are you doing right now? Well, I've got a website. You look at their website, you're like, oh, this website's trash. I should just build websites for realtors. Mm-hmm. Got a business. You ask this guy if he'll sign up. He says, yep, you're in business. The problem is that in your town, there's X number of realtors and you can get however many, but there's just all sorts of other problems with that. It's not just does somebody want it and we'll pay for it. It's like, is the size and shape of this category, will it produce a business that gives them ongoing value so that I don't have to continuously go out and find new people, that is big enough that there's enough new leads that I can replace people who churn plus grow the business? Yep. And will this give me as the business owner what I want?
Sure. And what's my objective? What's the strategy?
And it's just very difficult sometimes to start from the place of like minimum viable audience and just looking around you and just like grabbing the first thing you see. Now I'm going to kind of contradict what I just said, which is, I think the only way to discover good business opportunities is to notice something that you're already involved with. And so there's this dichotomy of, and the overall lesson here, and I'm trying to figure out a non-harsh way to say this, but the overall lesson is that your field of opportunity is really going to depend on your experiences, how many experiences you have, how often you've gotten out of your bubble, what kinds of people you know, what kinds of resources you have, what kinds of skills you have, what kind of jobs you've worked. It comes from you're going to cultivate good ideas from whatever you've done in the past or whatever you're doing. And so in a sense, it will be what you can see. I'm just trying to instruct people to be in motion, like go out and get new experiences, meet new people, have new connections, get out of your bubble. Because if you're always thinking small, if you're in a tiny little bubble, like I was in Stony Plain, Alberta, and all I can see is people starting businesses on Main Street. And so I start a snowboard shop because that's what I can see.
Yeah. Okay. That's a fair point. Yeah.
You're going to limit yourself. And in retrospect, I'm almost angry that I didn't know about software businesses earlier, because it's just in so many ways, it's a better market, and specifically a better market for me as someone who's been on computers since 1985. So what helped me was not just grabbing the first thing I could see, which was, I know other people who have skateboard and snowboard shops.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the industry. I've got some experience, and the business people I see in my little farm town they all start businesses on Main Street. So that's what's available to me. That's what I know. Once I got out of my bubble, started working in different industries, started traveling to other cities, starting to talk to other people who were able to show me what they were doing. That's what kind of opened my eyes. And then I was able to, once you kind of expand your bubble, your worldview, then you have a better chance of observing momentum in a category or whatever. Like once you're, especially like in the tech industry, where we are fortunate, because whether you're an employee or a freelancer or a consultant or, whatever you are, you just have evidence every single day in Slack where the boss comes in and goes, okay, like we need a way of generating banners on the fly. And someone goes, well, what about Canva? And then someone else says, well, we could do it programmatically with Banner Bear. We see people making purchasing decisions all the time. We see people in motion doing things. And I mean, if you're a freelancer or a consultant, you even have a better worldview in a lot of ways, because you're probably a member of 10 Slacks.
Yep.
And so if 7 of your 10 Slacks have talked about Canva in the last month, there's something going on there. And, and if you're super if your skills and interests align, like you just love making image editors on the web and you think Canva is garbage, then it would probably make sense for you to build a Canva competitor, because you're seeing this demonstrated demand,
Maybe. Okay. Well, let's talk about specifics. So Transistor, it is an existing thing. There are lots of them. And in fact, I think John did John work at Simplecast before?
Yeah. He built the original version.
Yeah. The one I liked. And then somebody bought it and ruined it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, and when I found Transistor, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I want. It's like Simplecast used to be.
Yes.
And how aware, I mean, that's just one anecdote. I have to imagine that you've heard that more than once, but maybe I'm the odd man out.
I mean, there's certainly folks like you, but the vast majority of our business comes from a giant funnel called searching on Google for how do I start a podcast.
Okay. So but before we get into that, how did you pick, I mean, first of all, podcasting, second of all, hosting, and there's a million things you could have done in the podcasting space. So I'm imagining the trend, the motion you saw in the marketplace was that podcasting is getting bigger.
Yes. And so this is where I use this metaphor of surfing. So just imagine you're going out every single day with your surfboard to different surf spots. You've learned to recognize the size and shape of good waves. And when you're on the shoreline, when there's a good wave coming, and your chances of swimming out and catching a truly exceptional wave are, if you showed up every day for a long time, you've learned to recognize the size and shape of good waves, you've worked on your fundamentals, you've got a surfboard and everything else, and you have a better chance of paddling out and catching that wave, especially a better chance than someone who stayed home and played Xbox that day. And so, I started my first podcast in 2012. I was a enthusiastic participant in the ecosystem. I joined Google Plus groups on podcasting. I joined private newsletters. I created a podcast about podcasting and interviewed some people. I started hanging out with those folks. And so I was in the mix. And as I'm taking my surfboard every day and going out, I start to notice that there's a bigger wave emerging right around the time Serial podcast came out. Yeah. And there's all sorts of kind of touchstones that showed me this. I start showing up to the coffee shop, and in the lineup, people stop talking about the Netflix shows that they're watching or the apps that they've just downloaded on their phone.
Yep.
And now they're talking about podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Like normal people talking about podcasts.
Right.
What is going on here?
Yeah.
And then
I remember the first time I saw a billboard for a podcast. I know exactly where I was. I know exactly when it was. I was like, okay,
yeah, like
that went mainstream.
you start to see, and the big one was a family reunion, and my sister, my youngest sister, who's 8 years younger than me, coming up and going, I've been listening to something called podcasts. Have you ever heard about podcasts, Justin? I said, Emma, I've been making podcasts since 2012. Like, but it was emerging into the public consciousness. And then there was other things too. I noticed the other change was that businesses were starting podcasts. So Basecamp had one, CodePen had one. The actual, like the initial event that cascaded into Transistor was John talking to me and saying, Cards Against Humanity is starting a podcast, and they want to use Simplecast, but I think I can build a better tool internally for it. So I'm going to do it. And I said,
he was working there.
Yeah, he was working there. And again, that's that viewpoint of the freelancer, the employee, the consultant who can notice these things, right? And I was just, at the time I was consulting and running Mega Maker. And so I had, Slack conversations. I'm like in the Mega Maker Slack alone, which is this little community I run. I mean, I probably know, I don't know, we had maybe 150 active members at a time, but of active members, there's at least 20 people who had a podcast. And many more wanted to start one. So I could feel things happening. And it wasn't just evidence of, it's not just the New York Times publishing an article about podcasting every week. It's also me seeing people every single day going to Libsyn or someone and paying them. It's me being at a party and I end up talking to somebody about podcasting. He's like, oh man, I've got 5 shows on Buzzsprout, but it's costing me a fortune. I wish I could combine it all into one place. It's all of these things. Okay. And certainly I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't already surfing those waters.
Okay. So you saw the wave. You weren't playing Xbox. You were out there trying to catch a wave, or you're at least swimming around and you're like, oh, there's a big wave coming. I mean, loads of people. I mean, I've been podcasting for even longer than that. And every year it's like, this is the year. It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. But clearly we're at a point where it's still got a lot of room to grow, and it's increasing. But so the question is though, of all of it's a whole ecosystem. You could have started a podcasting conference. You could have done podcast production. You don't do that. You could have had people set up shows. Like, how'd you pick hosting? Just because John had that like in his back pocket?
I mean, the other thing that happened was I remember when Nathan Barry switched from selling courses to working on ConvertKit.
Yeah.
I'm ConvertKit's longest running customer.
Really?
I switched to ConvertKit when I was working for an email newsletter company. And it was out of pity for Nathan. It's like this little product's not doing anything.
Yeah.
And I'll sign up and put my little newsletter on there. And he had a course business that was doing, $300,000 a year or something. And he decided to switch from that to this little SaaS company that had peaked at 5,000 a month and was probably down to 3,000 or something when he switched. And I just thought he was making the wrong decision. I was like, why are you doing this? But he saw that the course business model, there are things in it that are very difficult. And he wanted to grow to something bigger. And he's like, right now I'm doing whatever, 300,000. If I want to make it to 1 million, I know lots of people who run those businesses and I don't want to run a business like that.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that made me think, that's weird. Cause I was trying to be Nathan Barry. I was like trying to do that. And so I was like, what are you doing? You're switching. And I had been in SaaS, and I was like, it's difficult. Like it's not easy.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. The other thing is I met people outside my bubble. So I got introduced to Adam Wathan. He found me on the internet. Asked if I could help him.
Tailwind guy or the
yeah. he asked if I could help him launch a course. And I was like, oh, sure. He bought Marketing for Developers, this course I'd made. And so I said, sure, I'll help you out. I didn't know this. I didn't know who he was or anything. So I'm helping him with his launch. And I think at that point, my best year total had been like I'd done 150,000 in revenue. Adam launches this course for developers, refactoring to collections. And he does 150,000 in a month or something. And he's like, man, this seems good. Is this good? And I was just like, what the? And I realized then that marketing is like 90%, maybe even more, based on the underlying demand. How many people are there in the world out there that want this right now? And there was just, at the time, like I've tried to estimate how many PHP developers are in the world, but there's a lot, millions and millions and millions. They are all economically incentivized to get better at their jobs. Their employers are economically incentivized to help their devs be better. And so there's just a massive market of people who would happily shell out hundreds of dollars for a course to make them better. As opposed to Marketing for Developers, which was like, how many developers in the world are actually building something? It's just much smaller. How many of them want to learn marketing? Most developers hate marketing.
Zero. Yeah. How to drink poison for developers.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so the underlying demand was what moved the needle. And then Adam introduced me to Taylor Otwell, who's the creator the Laravel framework. And like Taylor's story is incredible. He admits he has no idea about marketing. His initial motivation to build Laravel was he was going to build an invoicing app, which he did, and thought he would make a bunch of money that way, which he didn't. And the first month that he released Laravel Forge, which is his first SaaS, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it was something like he jumped to $30,000 a month in a month. Mm-hmm. And I had seen enough growth rates and it worked for enough SaaS companies, funded SaaS companies who, it took them a year to get to $7,000 a month in recurring revenue. And here was this, this guy from Little Rock that's just like, kind of like, okay, I'm just going to launch this thing. And as a solo dev shop, did more than a funded company could.
Yeah. Okay. But let's keep that in context of the millions of people who did the exact same thing and got nothing out of it.
Sure. Yeah. There's there's layers to this advice, which is why tweet advice is sometimes difficult, because it's like, this is one part of the Venn diagram you got to have overlapping. Mm-hmm. There's other things as well. And if the challenge with business is that you have to have multiple things happen. You have to have multiple skills, multiple network. It's true. Yeah. People who have more skills, better network, more resources, better insights.
Yeah. They're starting on third base, right?
Yeah. And in some ways, as people keep accusing me of focusing on survivor bias, but I'm like, in business, survivor bias is what you want. Because if anybody off the street can start a business, of course, there's going to be more failures than wins. If all it takes to start a business is to put something up on Gumroad, which I'm sure millions of people have. Right.
The survivor bias isn't like, yes, you want the advice from the people who succeeded, but they a lot of times don't know what they did that, if anything, that even caused it. So, because the reason people want to hear people like you talk about this is so they can copy something. And the survivor bias problem is that you're almost certainly copying the wrong thing or something that can't be copied.
Yes, I actually don't. I think you don't want to copy somebody who's been successful. The lesson I'm trying to get people to understand is that there are some underlying truths in capitalism. And one is, if you have something that a lot of people want, and you can produce it in sufficient quantities, you will sell as much of that as totally people. Agree. And so
and just to clarify for the audience who've heard me talk about this a lot, the key word there was want. Mm-hmm. So if there are a lot of people out there I'm not like, so I'm a big fan of, for folks who have like no leads, they have skills, they don't know, they can't, how come I don't get any leads? I need more leads. It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of clients do you want? Or like any kind of client. And I'm like, well, that doesn't give us anywhere to start. Like
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't, a checkbook and a pulse doesn't count. So
Yes.
who wants what you, and if somebody said, oh, millions and millions of people want this thing, and when I talk about it, the language that I use, they recognize that it's the thing that they want. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
don't start small then. But that never happens. It's such it. Well, maybe you obviously have different life experience than me. You can
Mm-hmm.
point to examples of that happening, but if people are looking for advice, I mean, I feel like the strongest advice, or the clearest, most actionable advice so far is meet lots of people, get out of
Meet
your
lots of
bubble.
people. Yeah, meet lots of people, but also get good at observing evidence of demand.
That's fair.
I
Yeah, yeah,
think
yeah.
I think people can learn that. Here's just another practical example.
Mm-hmm.
So I just moved into a new neighborhood, and um, I had like a bunch of impressions here. Now you've got to be careful. Just because you keep seeing something doesn't necessarily mean there's a trend. But in business, if you keep hearing people saying, I want to buy, or I just bought, or I just
Mm-hmm.
paid,
Yeah.
that is
Yes.
a very good
Yes.
sign.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And so I move into a neighborhood, and I hear people talking about getting their car detailed. Oh, I heard, this neighbor's grandson is detailing cars, and some people are hiring this kid. And then I went to buy a truck, and I was like, oh, this truck's really clean. He's like, oh, I just had this one guy come and do it. He's mobile. You just call him up and get him to do it. And I just kept hearing like, man, there's a lot of people in this town that want their car detailed. And it's almost like it's unrealized demand, because most people actually will just keep their car undetailed. But if you came to their door and said, hey, do you want your car detailed? There's actually a fairly good chance in the right neighborhood that they do want their car
Yeah,
detailed.
I would say
And
yes to that right now.
yes, so this is what I'm talking about. Observing demand
Yes.
is this. And so I decide I'm going to hire this guy. What do? I go on Google. I see that my friend has also hired this guy to detail his car. I call my friend, hey, what about this guy? He says, oh, he's awesome.
Yeah.
So what are the chances? It's just like evidence on evidence on evidence that there are people in motion that want their car detailed. And there are things like this.
Yes.
And of course, they're underneath the surface. Of course, people aren't putting out a lawn sign that says, car
I want my
detailers
car
want
detailed.
it.
Right. Right. Right.
So there's things like this, and you can learn to observe that demand.
Agreed.
And the
Yeah.
kid that's running this business, he's in his early 20s, immigrant family, and he's killing it. He's working hard, but he's killing it. He gets new clients all the time because there's just enough people that when they see a clean car, or they see this fellow cleaning a car, they're like, hey, how can I get that done? Do you have a business card? Yeah, I got a business card. Like, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people can get good at observing these types of things. And it's fairly easy to go on Google and see, like, okay, how many car detailing shops are there? Wow, there's quite a few. How much do they charge? Wow, there's this much. It's like, I'll bet you I could make pretty good money at this if I just started doing it. And some demand, like some categories are just like that.
Yeah.
There's just like all this unrealized demand that's just sitting there. And all it takes is someone to come and take the lid off of it.
Right.
And all of a sudden you got a business.
Right. So let's loop it back to the sort of, you started to say something about Transistor, where you've got this engine of SEO leads, people are searching for this, searching for the other. So people are searching for this thing that they're going to spend money on. So
Yeah.
how do you, do you try to be a better mousetrap, or why not use Simplecast? I mean, I know why not, but why Transistor and not Simplecast? Because they don't even hear Simplecast; they just hear of you.
Yeah,
Your SEO's better?
a big part of it was so how to start a podcast is owned by some bloggers / affiliates that, like, the first 3 results is all them. And so the best thing we did was we created an affiliate program that was quite generous, 25%, something I learned from Nathan Barry. And now all of a sudden we are, and we had a great product. We demoed them through it. They liked it. A lot of them became customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is great, by the way. I mean, it's great.
And now we're in the top 5 at least of people being recommended on those sites.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that case, it's as simple as like in the blunt search of how to start a podcast, the first link people click on leads people to a website that has Transistor in the top 3. And that's been enough in that sense. You know what I mean? Just with that one channel, that's a pretty big chunk. At least probably a quarter of our business comes from stuff like that.
Do you spend any time trying to differentiate yourself from the competitors, or is it doesn't even matter?
Oh yeah. I actually think we compete on product because we are product people as opposed to a lot of the people in the podcast industry. Like we've been in tech forever. Mm-hmm. So John's an unbelievable product person. I've got lots of product experience. We know how to build products that scale. We know how to build products that are usable. That is an advantage for sure.
But how do I know that when I see three names listed on a website and I've got to pick one? Like, what do I, do I come to Transistor FM and like, oh, here's a comparison chart of us and the other guys? Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like when there's enough demand, this is why.
Yeah, well, that's like what I'm wondering. Is there so much demand, it doesn't matter, right?
When there's enough demand, in one sense, in one slice, it doesn't matter as much. There's certainly other things we're doing. We're leveraging everything. We're leveraging our brand. So now all of a sudden, Transistor is a brand that people know, partly because of SEO, partly because of affiliates, partly because of the audience I built up before Transistor. There's all these additive things, these cumulative things that help us with brand, and then customer service and support. We have 24-hour live chat support. And so that also helps. And then there's other things like for a segment of our customers, our story mattered a lot, but I kind of put that under brand. I think product, brand, and customer service are the big ones we focus on, and they all play off each other. Certainly, like if someone comes to me and goes, okay, well, what's the difference? Like, what's the real difference between you and Simplecast? I can point to a few things, but what really tips?
I'll point to a bunch of things.
Well, yeah, in your case, that would be, but I can tip the scales.
Yeah.
One of the things that tips the scales is the fact that I'm the co-founder and I'm answering their questions on live chat. One of the things that tips the scales is that they'll see one of the hundreds of YouTube videos I've published on how to start a podcast. One of the things that'll tip the scales is people in Reddit comments saying favorable things about us. There's all of these kind of iterative things. Certainly, if the actual product and the actual customer experience is no good, I think it's difficult to build a brand off crappy product and crappy customer service.
Well, yeah.
You kind of need all 3 pillars, but and again, there was some things we did in our initial splash, and there's some timing issues here also. Like we were the first new kid on the block in this current kind of crop of products. And so, Buzzsprout and Libsyn had been around for a long time. Simplecast had been around for a long time. And all of a sudden there's this fresh face, and our competitors, the newer competitors, hadn't come yet. So we were the first in the new wave of new folks. And a lot of people were just looking for a fresh face. This is why I think the surfing metaphor is apt, because we caught the wave kind of at the right time, right when it was cresting. And the other thing is there's no guarantees. Like I have no idea how long this will last, how big of a wave this is. I have some guesses because podcasting has grown 10 to 15% every single year. And it just seems like it's slow and steady. We only have we have 2.2% of the paid podcasting market. Like there's just opportunity. But on the other hand, like nobody really knows, right? That's how markets are. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's clear. Hopefully what's clear is that this is cumulative. As a founder, you're bringing all sorts of things to bear, and every strength and advantage you bring to the table, yeah, that matters. And honestly, some things just matter more. Like enthusiasm. I could pretty much go into a lot of markets, and if I was sufficiently enthusiastic, I have a leg up.
I agree.
Because that's just, and is that fair? No, none of this is fair. Capitalism certainly isn't fair. And this is, if we're going to play the game of capitalism, I think you have to realize that, yeah, the more good exposure you have, the more people you know, the more resources you have, the more skills you have, the more brand you have.
Right.
All of that helps.
Yep.
And you might really like, I don't know, like you might really just click with a channel, a marketing distribution channel, and that might be your channel, and you've got lots of skills in it or whatever, but maybe it's just not as good of a channel as other things. And so
I'm not sure what you mean. What do you mean click with a channel?
Like,
oh, I get TikTok. I understand how to TikTok.
So let's say like you're just really good at designing magazine ads. Like you just love magazine ads. You've clipped them out since you were a kid. You're great at designing them. And but you want to be in podcasting. It's like, well, I'm going to win because I'm passionate about SEO. And right now SEO matters way more than magazine ads. And so your relative strength or advantage in a market depends on a lot of these factors. And this is what makes it tricky, is like we could have an individual listening to this come to us and go, okay, I'm more introverted than Justin. I don't really want to be on screen. I don't want to, I'm just really passionate about designing billboard ads, but I want to succeed in this, a certain market. It's like, okay, well, I mean, this is just how it is. Like this is why I think one place where it does help to look at people who have won, like the survivorship bias element, is to say, okay, what are the underlying structures that got them there?
Yeah, that would be good if you could find them. Yeah,
and not in a cynical sense. In that, like, oh, well, of course Elon won because he has a huge Twitter following, but in a more like, okay, well, it makes sense that Elon can move markets with his tweets. Why? He's just got a rabid following. Of course that's going to happen. Can I learn anything from that? Well, I suppose if I'm the kind of person that likes to build an audience, some of that might be helpful, because if you have fans on Twitter, it's likely that they might buy, right? And then, there's things about that too. But I think we can, like, me seeing the success that Adam Wathan and Taylor Otwell had definitely had a positive impact on me, because it showed me that I needed to expand my worldview, and I needed to go after something where there was more momentum. I needed a bigger wave than the one I was riding. And them opening up their pocketbook was kind of like what opened my eyes, like, whoa, like this is possible. And I want a better life. So I'm going to go out and be open to, ideas that, and then John comes along to me. And remember, I'm noticing everything else. Like, I'm already noticing that podcasting is getting more popular. I'm already hearing all these businesses starting a podcast. And then John comes to me and goes, man, I'm thinking about building this thing for Transistor. And I like grab the microphone. I'm like, John, you got to let me do this with you, man. Like, I'm ready, and,
That's awesome.
he,
right.
That
planets aligned.
I was primed for the opportunity when it came. If you are committed to riding waves on a pond in Ohio, you're going to have a bad time. if you are committed to finding better waves, then you got to go where the waves are.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got to get in the water, and you've got to be there every day. You got to learn the fundamentals. You got to learn to paddle. And eventually, it's not a guarantee, but your chances of catching a big wave or a bigger wave go way up.
Yeah, you can't guarantee that you're going to catch a big wave, but I can guarantee you're not going to catch a big wave in a pond behind your house.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe I should also clarify here. When I say big wave, people automatically think I'm talking about something that's massive, but podcasting is actually a relatively small market. It's like there's 1.5 million podcasts total, but most of those are free podcasts on Anchor. And most of those don't have more than one episode. In the paid podcasting market, the leader is Buzzsprout. They've got 80,000. Libsyn's got another 75,000 customers. Like we're talking about a small category overall.
Mm-hmm.
Total spend.
To me, that's a barrel. Like you are fishing in a barrel. Like 10 isn't a barrel. Like 1,000. Yeah. So it's just all like to me, the ocean is like billions.
Yes.
So a couple 100,000 or maybe even 1 million is a barrel as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. We got to align our metaphors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're just wrong size barrel.
The one thing I don't like about the barrel is that there's no feeder system in there. Like it's like,
oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Maybe this is where fishing is a bit better, because every day I wake up and there's another 100 or so people that are searching that day how to start a podcast. There's probably actually thousands of people doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens every day. Tomorrow I'll wake up and there'll be more people searching for that. And so there's always fresh interest, or at least up until now, there's been fresh interest. This could change. But
you'll see signs way in advance.
We'll see signs. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're fishing at a small little stream and only, one fish every week comes through there, it's just like your chances of catching fish go way down.
Exactly.
But if you're at a rushing river and there's a salmon run, sure, it's not the ocean, and sure, you don't have a giant net, but your chances of catching a bunch of fish go way up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like pretty passionate about helping more independents get not just a middling success, but a fairly reasonable success. Like, for John and I, we're well over $1 million in annual revenue, and we have a small little 4-person company.
Mm-hmm.
And my life is significantly better than when I was really pushing hard doing the other stuff I was doing and earning $250,000 a year or whatever.
Right.
It's gotten better.
Sure.
And so the opportunity here is big enough that I actually get rewarded for my effort. And it feels like a lot of independent businesses are just trying to eke out just the bare minimum. Like their margin is just like, they're just barely above the watermark. And the problem with that is that business is so like, you never know what's going to happen, that if you're just getting a middling success, you're actually not getting paid for the risk you're making.
Yeah.
Like if all you're doing is like, oh, I've replaced my salary from my old job, or I've mostly replaced the salary, that's actually not ideal, because you're not getting paid for the risk that you're making.
Right.
Like you want to get paid back. And then if you're making multiple bets, like I did, you eventually need to get paid back for all those years in the wilderness where you just weren't doing well. Right.
Yeah.
And so you eventually want to search for a business that the water's rushing, there's lots of fish. Again, not commercial fishing level, but just enough for you to go home with a bunch of fish to make up for all those times you were just at a stream and you went for weeks and didn't catch anything, right? That's how families go hungry.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. Cool. Well, this has been super fun. I'm sure you've got SEO to work on. So,
well, this is another thing that I just feel like compelled to say, is that I'm working way less.
Well, that's all about leverage, right? And it doesn't need to be assessed. There's a dozen ways you can create leverage in a
Oh,
business.
this is why I love what you do, is because I remember hearing your thing about like ditching hourly, and it's just like, damn, that's it. Like, instead of me being tethered to this hourly rate,
Yeah.
which invariably gets reduced down to something, crappy.
Yeah.
I get to set the terms of what I'm doing. And if people want this result or they want this thing, I get to set the price at a level that gives me more life.
Right. Yeah.
I love that idea. I think it's great.
Awesome. Me too. Well, this has been super fun. I feel like we've spoken before, but I don't know that we ever actually have. I've watched so many videos and we've chatted.
Yeah, we did an async video thing where you recorded a video and I recorded a video. But this has been great to do it in real time.
Cool. Awesome. Well, great to have you. Tell people who are into podcasts and are ready to take the plunge and actually launch one of their own instead of just listening or guesting. Tell them where to go to find out more about Transistor.
Yeah. I mean, podcasting is one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. Like, you can link almost all of the people I know and the opportunities I've had to starting a podcast in 2012. So I do think more people should do it. And if they want to do it, they should do it at transistor.fm. You can just go sign up there. You get a 14-day free trial if you do that.
Awesome. Yeah, it is absolutely great. Love it. All right, man. Great talking to you.
Yeah.
Catch you next time. We'll see you in Slack.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time on Ditching Hourly. Bye. Hey, Jonathan again. The next time someone asks you for your hourly rate, I want you to stop what you're doing and go over to valuepricingbootcamp.com to sign up for my free value pricing email course. That URL again is valuepricingbootcamp.com. Hope to see you there.